Well, hi, I'm John Hart, and welcome back to Mr. America Hart. I am probably more excited about shooting this video today than I can remember in a long time. And quite simply, it's because breaking news, the Silver Era guys were not all natural. Hello, dun, dun, dun. I know, surprising, I know, shocking, right? I mean, these guys were apparently, by all accounts, these guys were the moral superiors to everybody else in bodybuilding. They were the ones that did everything 100% the right way. These guys were the ones that, for sure went ahead and, they just worked out. They drank milk, they worked their full body 3 times a week. And those were the routines that prove that's the best way to train. Okay. Well, dun, 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 here we go again. The interesting thing that just recently happened is on the heels of me asking a question about a week ago in one of my videos that I posted, I asked, for people to go ahead who were really cynical. They don't seem to trust any routines made by anybody who's ever used drugs. They just, out the window they go. And they always point back to the Silver Era as guys who have really nice physiques and that didn't use drugs and did everything right. And that's the way to work out. So, and I sound like I'm laughing here, and it's just amazing to me, the timing, okay? And what do I mean? Well, this morning, I'm just, spending a few minutes cruising through some YouTube land, checking out some videos, and up in my feed pops something from Natty Life. Natty Life is apparently one of these guys that shoots videos focusing a lot on the Silver Era and the Silver Era Bodybuilders. And what was he doing? He was interviewing Golden Era Bookworm. Golden Era Bookworm is also another guy who is sort of like a historian and follows a lot or shows a lot of videos having to deal with not just the Golden Era, but the Silver Era. The Silver Era is considered that era prior to when Arnold came on the scene. It's the, let's call it the 40s, 50s, 60s, in that zone right there. It's not so definite when it began, when it stopped, but the 40s, 50s, 60s, let's put it that way. And even though the physiques obviously changed, from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, each decade they seem to change. Just there's never been any sort of admission, by anybody that they used any kind of drug so that there was any kind of availability to the bodybuilders. But we all know that testosterone was synthesized years ago, back in the 40s or the 30s even, before that, supposedly. So I'm taking a wild shot at what the date was. I don't know off the top of my head, but it was way back. And apparently Dianabol has been around, since Ziegler and all these guys, somewhere around late 50s, the 60s, that started to kick too. So Dianabol is a derivative of testosterone. And so all of this being said, Golden Era Bookworm shot out with a video where he came out with some proof. Just some proof that these guys, not especially, but in particular, one of the hallowed names in all of bodybuilding, and believe me, I'm not doing this to besmirch anybody. I'm reporting the news here. I'm reporting what's been shown. I'll even put a couple short clips from that interview that they did together. I'm not going to put a whole ton of it up because I'm one of those guys. I don't appreciate when people take, too much of my content and put it up. And just by fair use, because I'm reporting on this, I'm going to just give you a quick blurb from these guys, showing that in fact, Golden Era Bookworm, apparently he got a hold of, a letter, and the letter was from a pharmacist from way back in the day, in the 40s. And that pharmacist had this letter, and the letter is written from John Grimek. John Grimek was a Mr. America, 2-time Mr. America. He was considered just unbeatable when he was competing, and that was in 1939, 1940. 1939, 1940. So those 2 years, he was Mr. America, and they made that rule, special rule, where you cannot win the Mr. America more than 1 time, and then you must move on from that. Or back then, it was retire. You're done. Finished. So as we go on, and by the way, I understand from an athlete's perspective, when something is that important to you, okay, this is an athlete's mind, how it works. You're willing to go to extremes. You're willing to take chances. You're willing to do whatever it takes to get to, the end result, to get the win. Really, that's what it is. So when I talk about, when I said at the beginning of this video that, the guys from the Silver Era were viewed as this morally upstanding pack of guys that were just out having fun, lifting weights, and somehow happened to come across as wonderful looking physiques, albeit with slightly higher body fat levels, they were just the way that it should be done, all the way. Well, John Grimek apparently wrote a letter to his pharmacist asking about methyl testosterone. Hello, now we're talking. Now, there's no proof he took it. There's no proof he took it. Okay, let's be real here. There's no proof that he took it, okay? But the fact that he was even asking, okay, let's just put it out there. The fact that he was even asking, there's no proof that he took it during that time in 1943. The letter is dated 1943, which is after he won the Mr. Americas, okay? But in 1943, it is documented apparently he did in some interview. Golden Era Bookworm points out that he did use testosterone in the 50s. Well, if he was using it in the 50s, hello, okay, let's just be real again, then yeah, the athlete, he wasn't the only one. He was not the only one. Let's be real. That's it. Plain and simple. He was not the only one. I can't name any other names because there's no other names to name. This is all based on that letter, okay? So obviously, he had an interest in it. Obviously, he heard about it. Obviously, that particular compound was being, searched out. And heck, let's go ahead. I'm gonna roll the tape, roll the piece about the evidence. Here you go.
My friend Carlos from the channel Golden Era Bookworm recently put out a video presenting some of this evidence, including a letter by the one and only John Grimek, which showed he had an interest in methyl testosterone all the way back in 1943. There
it is. Okay, so so Golden Era Bookworm, I guess his name is Carlos, talking to Natty. Natty Life is the thinner guy on the right with the purple on, just sharing the evidence that he has obtained from this pharmacist, this older man from back in the day. So apparently this is a big deal. These guys went on to converse back and forth. The tone of that video, by the way, I'll put the link down below so you can actually, it's a very long video. It's about an hour long, but I'll put the link down below. The tone of that video was, somber, at best, somber, because I can understand why. These two guys, they love that era. They admit it as much, by the end of the video, they admit flat out that they really loved that era, the idea of there being clean physiques. Heck, so did I, so did I. I'm just not married to the idea that, there were some morally superior people out there. And even now, as a natural bodybuilder myself, and having competed as a natural pro, if anything, I may find a little amusement in this because being part of a group of guys in natural bodybuilding who even to this day, the guys that I competed against, the ones who had really bang on physiques were accused of using drugs, finding a way of using drugs, having the secret sauce, even myself. I've been told there's no such thing as natural, okay? And you're not natural. I've seen guys talking about me online in the comments section of my very own videos, accusing me. They see my pictures, they're like, no way, no way, no way. Well, yes way. Okay, I was natural for all of these shows, and I was natural, in all the pictures that I've presented to you, and I've been natural, and what do you want me to say? Okay, I know the truth, but apparently that's not good enough. Well, I've also been drug tested regularly throughout my competitive career, off season, in season, and so have my co-competitors. They've been drug tested just the same. If we showed up to a bodybuilding contest, the likelihood was, as a natural pro, that the promoter, he had the right, they were going to use. They always kept a couple extra drug tests. I know this as a promoter myself when I did. As a promoter, I promoted the LA in Los Angeles, California, natural bodybuilding show. And you pick some natural pros from the audience and you include them in your drug testing for that show with the other competitors that were competing that day. great off-season testing. If you flunk that test, you're gone. That's it. And these are Olympic drug tests. So, did we ever catch people? Yes. Yes. So for those of you who say, oh, yeah, they know those tests don't mean anything. We caught guys left and right all the time. And so the bottom line is were there plenty of people who were natural? Yes. In current day natural bodybuilding? Yes. That have amazing physiques? Yes. Do they look like drug-using bodybuilders? No. No, we're all about 80 pounds lighter than drug-using bodybuilders. That's a fact. Can we get just as ripped? Yeah. Can we get just as big? No. That's all there is to it. So from a current day, and I shouldn't say current because I'm retired right now, but as a recent natural pro, all in the, from say 2013 to late 2010s, I actually should say 2012 to the late 2010s, competing as a natural pro, I find it amusing. I do. That we would be the ones accused of, using drugs and all that. But meanwhile, guys, when there was no drug testing, but there was access to drugs, they were never accused of such things. So, because they did it the right way. Well, it's just like that. So these guys went on in the video to have a good discussion about, what it was like back in the day and, how, the advent of the synthesis of testosterone, how it became even a little bit better, safer, how at the beginning there really wasn't major changes from it, although there was, okay? They just came with negative side effects. That was the problem, because they had not synthesized it properly and made a proper derivative out of it, like Dianabol. When they did, oh boy, things changed, radically changed. I mean, boom, the physiques blew up. And they make an interesting point, the two of them, okay? These guys are Silver Era historians, okay? And Natty Life, as well as Golden Era Bookworm, they both make the point that out of all of these guys, that, even as they got older, into their 80s, they did interviews. These guys were very popular for doing interviews. They, as older men, speaking about the good old days and how they trained and ate and everything. And they would be asked direct questions about access to drugs, steroids in particular. And man, don't you know, every one of them would be like, no, we hate those things. No, we never would do those things. No, all of that. Not one came out. Okay, that's what they said in the video. Golden Era as well as Natty, they both said not one ever came out and said, yeah, I did it, except for Bill Pearl. They did mention him. They mentioned Bill Pearl. They said he was the only one who came clean and said he did it. Okay? He tried it, he said. Okay? So that being the case, that doesn't mean because they never admitted it that they didn't do it. Okay? That's the part. They also make the point about how their legacies were at stake. You have these guys whose names, Reeves, Grimek, Eiferman, all these guys from the 40s, the 50s that were just Delinger, Mr. America's guys competing, Mr. USA, they had amazing physiques, and apparently, their legacies were at stake here in their older age, and they were enjoying the fact that they were looked at as, icons in bodybuilding. Their names were synonymous with the Silver Era. How bad would it have looked if they said, well, we use drugs? Or one of them said, yeah, I did, right? I mean, crushing, especially the stigma associated with it, going all the way into the 60s, the 70s. I mean, it wasn't public, okay? It really wasn't public about bodybuilding until we got into, the 90s, okay? In the 90s is when it really, really became public. Why? Because of sports, because of baseball. Baseball players were popping for steroids. And then they found out they were getting them through the gyms, and they were getting them from trainers, and they were getting... Bodybuilders carried the obvious side effect of these steroids being so massive. So they were always looked at as the biggest drug abusers, okay? But it wasn't public knowledge, big time, until we got into the 90s and the 2000s. So back in the 80s, it still wasn't, all over public knowledge. They all thought it was, you could build a physique like your favorite superstars by taking the supplements that they were using in the bodybuilding magazines, Okay? I mean, that's how supplement manufacturers sold supplements. They'd, get these bodybuilders on a contract who were loaded, looked amazing, professional bodybuilders. To this day, they look great. But today, people are hip to it, and they know that they're not natural, and they don't claim to be. That's the thing. But here's my point. When Golden Era and Golden Era Bookworm and Natty Life both said, that they found it a little convincing that these guys back in the day, nobody admitted to ever using these things, even in old age. You would think someone other than Bill Pearl would have mentioned it in old age. Well, Bill Pearl did. But let's just say this. The stigma attached to the steroids, okay? They wouldn't want to blow their legacy. I do agree with you guys, 100%. That's a fact. And then the stigma of, they built their physiques with the drugs. They don't want that getting out, number 2. And then number 3, let's just talk about other stigmas of the day that they most definitely would never admit, never talk about, ever, okay? I mean, being gay back in the day. That was a humongous no-no to their manhood, okay? In the public's eye, it wasn't like it was 2023. Today, there's an LGBTQ all over the place. And, coming out of the closet, everybody gets applauded these days by the general public. Back in those days, these guys grew up in an era where it meant you weren't a man, you were a girl. There was something wrong with you. All of that stuff. Their families would disown them. So they grew up in an era where they would never admit being gay either. So does that mean none of them were gay? I highly disagree. I believe some of them were, just like I believe some of them were, in fact, using the steroids. Okay? So there we have it. It's interesting because later on in that video, that 1-hour video with Golden Era and Natty Life, they discussed the obvious changes of the physiques going from the 50s, 60s, and into the 70s. And they pointed out that the accessibility of the steroid, of the testosterone derivatives, such as the Dianabol, was there in the later 50s. And how the physiques just kaboom, they did blow up. And they found it kind of ironic, even though there's no proof, but they found it kind of ironic that coinciding with the advent of better drugs being synthesized, the physiques started to blow up. And they were bigger than ever before. And they started to get leaner than ever before as you moved into the 60s. And, bigger than the guys in the 50s. They had more lean muscle mass, less body fat, still a layer of fat on them into the 60s. You could see that even on the first Mr. Olympias, who did admit using drugs, Dianabol. You had Larry Scott, you had Sergio, Oliva. And then Arnold came on the scene. And whoa, Nelly, we're talking about massive 240-pound guys all of a sudden, 230-pound guys with abs, paper-thin skin, just looking like something else from some other planet. And yes, they've all admitted to it. So things changed going from the 50s to the 60s to the 70s. And those obvious changes, and they even threw around the name Leroy Colbert, Leroy. And I'm going to run this clip, and then I'm going to tell you a little something that Leroy had to say. So here you go. Roll that clip.
When you compare the size of men like Leroy Colbert, and I will say others, you have Jack Delinger, really massive guy, right, for the Silver Era, one of the biggest guys. Mm-hmm. And you have others as well. The names now escape me, but I'm not saying that they did, but there is a big question mark because these guys.
Yeah, yeah. What they had was drugs. Okay, that's what they had. Say it. They had access. That was the change. Okay, Delinger, all these guys. They had access. It wasn't just one person. Okay, so the physique changes were wild. And a guy like Leroy Colbert, who has been held up for years as another natural, who trained a lot, who did a lot of sets, who did a lot of and was big. And in that interview, they talk about how he used to admit he would have done anything that if steroids were around, he would have taken them, although he denied taking them, because he would have done anything to get bigger. And that brings me to a little bit of a, as I close on this video, a little bit of a discussion on what exactly we're talking about. Are there morals involved in this? Well, from an athlete's perspective, I can tell you, I don't believe so at all. If you are within the realm of the rules of your competition, okay, then morals has nothing to do with it. Morals have nothing at all to do with it. So back in the day, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and even the 70s, they had no drug testing going on. These were not drug-tested shows. So therefore, they weren't breaking any enforceable rules. It was a free-for-all. So they could take it. They were getting the edge up on their competitor. That is an athlete's attitude. Almost all athletes in every sport will do whatever it takes. The morals come into play when you discuss, are they doing it within the bounds of the rules of their organization? If they are, then it's not cheating. So if you're in natural bodybuilding, for example, and they say, like the WNBF, I competed in the WNBF, the World Natural Bodybuilding Federation. The WNBF, at the time, they had a 7-year no drug use rule. So they did Olympic drug testing in and out of season, and they also did polygraph testing on top of the urinalysis and whatever else they did. So in the polygraph, there were people who flunked the simple question of, how long have you been clean? Have you been clean in the last 7 years? Now they've bumped it up to 10 years, okay, which I think is really nice. But in natural bodybuilding, there are some people who did not abide by that rule, flunked the test, even a simple polygraph they fail. On the urinalysis, they would pass the polygraph, but on the urine test, they'd pop for some steroid. Okay, that is having no morals. That is a moral issue. You're a liar then. You're a cheater then. So getting caught, yeah, you deserve to be labeled then. A liar, a cheater. I don't call any of the guys that ever took steroids a cheater or a liar unless they were doing it when they said they weren't or when they signed an agreement with an organization that they were not going to. If they did, if they're in a natural organization and they did use them, then they are a liar and cheater. Simple as that. So no, I don't consider any of the IFBB pros anywhere at any time unless they were being drug tested for a short period. I believe it was the end of the Lee Haney era in 1990. And then I think for a minute or two in the mid-90s, they did for diuretics. But the steroids were all being tested and the growth hormones in the 1990 Mr. Olympia, in that area right there, 89, 90 at the Nationals. They tried, okay? So if they used them then and they still went in the show, they're a cheater, a liar. But other than that, it's an athlete's perspective. It's an athlete's attitude. A bunch of you guys, I love to hear your comments down below and realize the ones of you who are just going to nod your head and go like this and say, no, it's cheating, it's cheating. I would wager that, I'm not a betting man, but I would put it to you that you're not a competitor. You've never competed. And, not in bodybuilding. And I would question, have you ever competed in any physical sport that the option of taking a steroid was there, but you were not being drug tested? Whoa. You see? So if that's the case, then no, not at all. I mean, you can go ahead and do whatever it's a free-for-all. It's a wild, wild west if they're not drug testing. Okay? So hit me down below. I want to hear your comments on this one in particular because does a letter from John Grimek, in your mind, you know where I stand on it, okay? I believe, yes. It was not rampant, but many of the guys had access. From Grimek all the way up to the 70s when we know they for sure had it, okay? And better compounds as the decades went by, which, not coincidentally, the physiques got that much better about every 10 years, amazingly better at that. So What is your opinion? Does John Grimek's letter written to a pharmacist asking about methyl testosterone, does that mean that Silver Era bodybuilders were not natural? Does that mean that it's just him? And Bill Pearl, apparently. Bill Pearl admitted, according to Golden Era Bookworm. I don't know where he admitted it, but according to him. If, in fact, he did too, then what's the deal? I mean, do you question all of it now? And maybe I'll refer you. I'll put the link down below to my last video that I did where I gave parameters, 3 or 4 parameters on which training routines can we trust that were actually developed by natural guys that did not use drugs or have access to drugs or were drug tested and replicated their results on other people. Because otherwise, all you're coming up with is a bunch of drug users' routines that they've made, but if they were great trainers, they adjusted them for the naturals that they trained and got great results. So that's it for today. Hit me with those comments down below. I cannot wait to read these things. As you can tell, I was all ready to go, in this video. And that's it for today. From my heart to you, John Hart. I feel for some of you guys. I do. I hear some heartbreaking out there. I hear some, dreams shattering, all of that stuff. And to find out this late in the game, it must be a kind of a slap in the face. But anyway, before you go, off to my left, you're going to see that's the subscribe button for my channel right there. Why don't you give that thing a tap if you're liking the videos I'm doing? And then down below, off to your left, you're going to see a thumbs up button. Why don't you give that thing a tap? That is the thumbs up button for my channel. It'll let the YouTube algorithm know that you're liking my videos, and it's really good for the algorithm and for me too. I really appreciate that.